The Jewish community in South Africa had swelled from a few thousand in the late 1800s as a result of the 40,000 economic migrants from Lithuania and Eastern Europe. Hitler's rise to power in 1933 exacerbated anti-Semitism and prejudice against Jews and other minorities. On the eve of World War II, approximately 240,000 Jews lived in Lithuania. In Vilna alone, there were over 50,000 Jews, 100 synagogues and prayer houses.
I was born on the 25th of January 1932 in Postville. My father tells a story. There was a person by the name of Vladimir Jabotinsky who was a revisionist, who was a right-winger. And he traveled Eastern Europe. He came, must have been Postville, and he spoke from the back of a train. And his famous words, Eden must leven, Jews, we must run. In 1935, I had my mother's brother was in South Africa. He, in those days, was a rich man. And he decided to bring my father to South Africa. We left Postville in either September or October 1938. We came to Southampton. We had booked, or my uncle had booked, onto the Cape Town Castle. We arrived in Cape Town. We got onto a train to Joburg.
Once the Germans' army moved into the Baltic states, which was June 1941, they brought with them something called an Einsatzgruppen. This was a mobile killing squad, and their task was to round up the communities in the small villages of Lithuania, in the towns, and to actually herd them outside of these towns and cities even, and to murder them. And they started this process almost immediately. Now, they were a relatively small group, so one has to ask the question, well, how did they manage to do it? And the way they managed to do it was to enlist the assistance of the local militia and local civilians. So these were people who volunteered to join these groups, these mobile killing squads, and they did most of the work. They were the people that handled the machine guns. They were the people that supervised the movement of the people. They were the people that actually herded the people into the pits or the storage tanks or wherever they are found.
When Lithuania was invaded by the Nazis, they were more cruel, the Lithuanians were more cruel than the Nazis themselves. But the church exhorted, the primate of the Catholic Church in Lithuania exhorted the Nazis to kill harder and faster. And that's how the 9th Fort came about during that period, that awful period of extermination of the Jews of Eastern Europe, Russia and Eastern Europe. That 9th Fort were the killing fields. There were big trenches, and the Jews were lined up beside the trenches, and the gunmen had their positions on top, and they mowed down the Jews as they stood there, and they fell into the spit. It was a horrible, horrible period of Jewish history.
This was a terrible shock for the Lithuanian Jews, because after all, they'd lived in Lithuania for hundreds and hundreds of years, and they had built up relationships with their Lithuanian fellow Catholics and the rest of the Lithuanian population, and had good relationships with them to a large extent. So this was a shock to the Jewish population, and for many of them, I don't think they even realized what was happening, that there was such strong anti-Semitism which was latent, which was boiling underneath the sentiment of Lithuanian population, combined with the fact that there was a tremendous anti-Bolshevik feeling. And the occupation by the Soviets of Lithuania had been a major problem for many of the Lithuanian population. And they saw, and that's, though it's not true, they saw that the Jews were complicit in supporting the Soviet occupation. And so they saw the Nazis as, in fact, their liberators, and they supported their initiatives.
I think there was a very significant proportion of families left behind. And I think for a larger part of the Lithuanian Jewry who settled in South Africa, had their children in South Africa, they had mothers and fathers and siblings in the country. And you can see it in the response to the Holocaust when news arrived in South Africa of what had happened to the Jewry of Lithuania, which was practically obliterated during the war. Lithuanian Jewry was devastated by the murders of the Holocaust. When that news reached South Africa, it sent a shockwave through South African Jewry. South African Jewry was plunged into the deepest mourning because it was so immediate.